Look at the chandelier above their heads. 4 sockets, but only 1 candle, and that 1 candle is burning. For centuries, almost nobody asked why. It seemed like a small detail in a painting full of small details. But if the theory some historians now believe is correct, that single unlit candle might be the reason this entire painting exists. This is the Arnolfini Portrait, painted by Jan van Eyck in 1434, and it may be one of the most quietly deceptive paintings ever made. Not because it's a forgery, because for nearly 500 years, almost everyone who looked at it saw a happy story that the evidence doesn't actually support. Let's start with what we can say for certain. A man and a woman stand together in a wealthy merchant's home in Bruges, a trading city in what is now Belgium. The man wears a heavy fur-trimmed robe. The woman wears a green gown so full of fabric that art historians have estimated the fur lining alone would have required somewhere close to 2,000 squirrel pelts. This is not modest dress. This is a household announcing its wealth to anyone who walks in. There's a single orange sitting on the windowsill, with more piled on the chest below it. Oranges had to be imported, and in 15th century Flanders, that made them a luxury item, displayed the way a family today might leave an expensive car parked out front. A small dog stands at the woman's feet. The man raises one hand, almost like he's taking an oath. None of this is filler. Van Eyck was not a painter who wasted a brushstroke, and that becomes obvious the moment you look closely at the wall behind them. Above a small round mirror, in careful Gothic lettering, Van Eyck wrote a Latin inscription that translates roughly to Jan van Eyck was here, 1434. Artists of this period usually signed their work in a corner, if they signed it at all. Van Eyck placed his signature directly in the center of the composition, worked into the scene like it belonged there, not painted by. Was here. That phrasing is strange enough that in 1934, exactly 500 years after the painting was made, the art historian Erwin Panofsky proposed something that changed how the entire piece was read. He argued this wasn't simply a portrait, it was closer to a legal witness statement, a painted record of a real event, with Van Eyck's signature functioning as the mark of someone who had actually been present. And if you look into that small mirror, you can see exactly why he thought that. The mirror is convex, framed by 10 tiny painted scenes from the Passion of Christ, and inside its curved glass, the entire room is reflected back, including the couple from behind. But there are 2 more figures in that reflection, standing near the open door. One wears blue, one wears red. Neither of them appears anywhere else in the painting. Panofsky's theory was that these 2 figures were witnesses to a wedding, and that one of them might even be Van Eyck himself, quietly writing his own presence into the room as proof that whatever happened here, he saw it happen. It's an elegant theory. For decades, it was the accepted one. There's just one problem with it. Panofsky identified the couple as Giovanni di Arrigo Arnolfini and his bride. Later research into Italian merchant records found that this particular Arnolfini didn't marry until 1447, 13 years after this painting was finished, and 6 years after Van Eyck had already died. Whoever these 2 people are, they were not that couple. The more likely candidates are a cousin, Giovanni di Niccolao Arnolfini, also a cloth merchant from Lucca living in Bruges, and his wife, Costanza Trenta. Records suggest they married sometime before 1426. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If this painting really was made in 1434, why paint a wedding portrait 8 years after the wedding? Here's where the story turns. Costanza Trenta's name appears in records from 1433, 1 year before this painting was completed. After that, she disappears from them. In 2003, the art historian Margaret Costa proposed that this isn't a wedding portrait at all. It may be a memorial commissioned by a grieving husband to honor a wife who had already died. Suddenly, the small details stop feeling decorative and start feeling deliberate. The candle above the man is lit. The candle above the woman has burned out. In the visual language of the period, an extinguished flame was a familiar symbol for a life that had ended. Look at the chair beside the bed. Carved into the top of the post is a tiny figure, easy to miss, of a woman standing over a dragon. That's Saint Margaret of Antioch, the patron saint invoked by women in childbirth, famous in legend for being swallowed by a dragon and surviving. Some historians connect this detail to a theory that Costanza may have died during or shortly after childbirth, though this remains speculation rather than documented fact. And the dog at her feet, so often read as a simple symbol of marital loyalty, has a second meaning in the art of this period. Small dogs also appear carved at the feet of women on medieval tomb effigies, positioned there as guardians meant to accompany the dead. Even the mirror's frame may be built around this same idea. The 10 scenes of the Passion are arranged so that Christ's life sits on the man's side, and his death and crucifixion sit on the woman's side. Which brings us to the detail almost everyone notices first, and almost everyone gets wrong. The woman's rounded silhouette has led generations of viewers to assume she's pregnant. She isn't, or at least there's no reliable evidence that she is. Gathering the front of a heavy gown into the arms was simply fashionable among wealthy women of the period. Van Eyck painted the Virgin Mary in nearly the same pose in another work, with no suggestion of pregnancy intended. Given that Giovanni Arnolfini's fortune came from cloth, showing off an enormous quantity of expensive fabric on his wife's body may have been less about her body and more about his business. So what is this painting actually showing us? A celebration or a grief that was never named out loud? Historians still disagree, and that disagreement matters more than a tidy answer would. Some read it as a wedding portrait, painted in the style of a legal document. Others read it as a widower's private memorial, filled with symbols only he would fully understand. Both readings can't be entirely true, and neither has been proven wrong. What we do know is that in 1434, in a merchant's home in Bruges, Jan van Eyck stood in that room and decided the moment deserved this level of precision. Every fold of fabric, every reflection, every flame, placed with intention. He signed it not as an artist claiming credit, but as a witness, recording that he had been there. 600 years later, we're still trying to work out exactly what he witnessed. If paintings like this one, hiding real history behind ordinary objects, are the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. There are more of them waiting.